Welcome everybody to this workshop for Recovered Water Management Solution, Multi-Criteria Analysis. It's the second of two workshops on this topic, and today we will be working through another iteration of the multi-criteria analysis. I'll just remind everybody that this is a public workshop, so it's been live streamed, and just remind everyone to have their phones turned off or on silence so we have no interruptions. I'll just like to now invite, before we start, Councillor Maxwell to start us with a karakia, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. He ino I tātou, let us pray. Kia tawano kia tātou katoa te ata whai o tō tātou a riki ai hukraiti. Me te aroha o te atua me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki ta wairua tapu ai nei a. Ake tonu atu. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. May the grace of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us now and evermore. Amen. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor. Today we have an apology from Councillor Patterson, who can't be with us, and I note that we've got Councillor Waru and Councillor Brown online, both who may need to leave later on this afternoon at 1:30 or 2:30 p.m, so those are noted, thank you. Today I will just acknowledge that we've got Stavros and Michael and Thomas Collet and Ian Gray with us today, who are going to be doing part of the presentation, but to start off with, I'll hand over to our CE, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Look, we're going to hope to keep this pretty informal, and so I'll just jump in from time to time. I'd start by saying we've got three presenters here today, including two GMs, because this is a pretty big topic, and we're expecting some really good, tough, robust conversations here today, and hopefully this being the second iteration, we'll have addressed some of your feedback from the first round, and we can move forward, and towards the end we'll give you some indication of the next steps after this. So with that, hand over to Stavros to do some recap, and then it'll just be a tag team amongst the four of us as we go through this presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Andrew, and good afternoon, everyone. A quick recap, we'll go fairly quickly, because obviously we want to use most of our time to discuss your views and your opinions and your inputs into these considerations. And the question again arises: what is an MCA? It's an instrument where we use a whole range of criteria to help us make some important decisions. The tool is used to assess and compare different possible alternatives and options based on those criteria, and obviously those criteria are evaluated through a set of quantitative and qualitative levels. So why use an MCA? Obviously the framework is a good tool to guide complex decisions, because rarely decisions we make are monolithic. They have to take into consideration a range of factors, and obviously identifying those factors that form the basis of criteria are quite important, especially within infrastructure where significant investment has to be made. And obviously the most balanced approach needs to be arrived at by considering a whole range of impacts. This particular project, which considers the future or the approach to managing our recovered water, I'll just reiterate, we have somewhere in the region of 25 to 27,000 properties that produce wastewater every day. Those that wastewater is in the value of about 25,000 cubic meters of wastewater a day. That water needs to be directed away from properties for a whole range of reasons, but primarily for health reasons, and needs to go to a treatment plant. A significant investment is made to our upgrade of a treatment plant to accommodate current needs, to accommodate regulations and regulatory frameworks, but also to enable our future growth. And the important process after that, the important question is that once we have recovered and treated that wastewater, what happens to it after that? This project needs a framework for which we can convene a working group, the representatives of the community, including EWE partners and other stakeholders that they have a particular view and interest in the subject matter to progress the project, and therefore it's important to establish a framework for which we can work through that working group. To progress past stage 1, all stage 1 criteria must be met. And I'll come back to it in a minute. We need to establish 2 differentiations. One is that criteria that must be met. They're absolutely imperative to be met. Otherwise, an option will not progress to the next stage. And those criteria, obviously, we need to be careful not to set a net too fine for stage 1 criteria. Otherwise, we'll start discounting options very early on, and a prudential judgment needs to be made as to what is an absolutely strict technical criteria versus other barriers or other constraints the project may have. And therefore, we want to encourage as many options as possible to give that working group and eventually the community the opportunity to satisfy themselves that most of the available options have been considered effectively. In both stages, where we're talking, once we pass stage 1 and we have stage 2, which is defined more about values, what is the level of value assigned to each one of those criteria, then obviously that stage would take place in a more refined way, not such a, not dominated by technical requirements, but I'll come back to it in a minute. But in both stages, fewer is recommended to have fewer values is a preferred method to construct this tool. If you have a whole range of values and a whole range of technical criteria, it can become very difficult to discern and identify the most preferred options. Stage 2 values and the weighting should aim to produce a well-balanced and clear recommendation. Again, there will be always going to be different perceptions as to how much value and weighting we assign to each value, but we aim to achieve a set of balancing approaches where the most important values are considered, are recognized, and we as a community and as elected members especially seek your guidance as to what is the level of weighting we assign to each one of those. And we have a streamlined, if we have a streamlined value set from the first workshop, obviously, we can talk about it when we present it later on. So
just maybe get Stavros to pause here now. Thomas might pick it up, and there's just to be clear, saying up front what we'd like to get from you today in terms of the process. So Thomas, you want to?
Thank you. We will shortly be doing a little bit of an exercise with you on the whiteboard. We will be asking you on your thoughts with regards to the weightings for the criteria for stage 2. And the whole purpose of that is to get that into a formal paper to you into the future with regards to a formal decision-making process. So with that, Stavros, you want to kick into this?
Yeah, I think that just reiterates what Thomas said. We require from you, expect from you some direction on stage 1, the pass and fail criteria, some direction on stage 2, and obviously we'll ask you to do a bit of an interactive approach to that, and some direction on the stage 2 weighting. In stage 2, we have do we have the right values, and obviously the next question is that do we have the right weighting on each one of these values. Stage 1 pass or fail criteria, we've got a technical feasibility assessment, and again, to give some examples as to what to mean by that, an option must meet a technical feasibility assessment. An option needs to be able to demonstrate very clearly the recovered water can be conveyed somewhere. It needs to be put in a pipe, it needs to be put in a pump station, it needs to go somewhere. If you can't do that, then obviously the option is not viable. The other consideration, as an example of technical feasibility, is that is the discharge point, the discharge option is going to cause unwarranted risks or unexpected risks down the stream. Erosion, for example, is going to create ground instability, is going to flood some people's properties. Then the technology availability. Do you have the technology to be able to deal with that? For example, sometimes questions are asked: can we gasify 25,000 cubic meters of recovered water on a given day? The theoretical approach is that, yes, but do we have the technology to do that? So it's a technical consideration. Then we have legal and regulatory compliance. Again, we have to meet that. To operate a treatment plant and its effluent, we need to meet we need to secure resource consents. Those resource consents will carry with them resource consent conditions. Those resource consent conditions can be based at very least at the national performance standards for a treated effluent. And at the moment, the country is working towards developing national performance standards, which specifies what it can and cannot be contained within a final effluent. What are the levels of impurities? What are the levels of present materials that must be contained into those in the recovered water in order to meet the regulatory and the national standards. So these are parameters that an option either achieves it or fails to achieve it, and therefore those criteria are quite simple. Then we've got a question about whether landowner approval, acceptance or objection is a significant first stage criteria. What is included in this if we include that, it means no option will proceed past stage one without approaching the landowner. That means that if an option will require access to a particular land and the landowner says absolutely no, it's not going to come through here, we reject it. And that's a question mark for us to debate today. Second one, does it fit? If money was not an issue, if you can spend $1 billion onto it, for example, should we include it as a stage one criteria? And what we're saying here, we're setting a parameter and asking the questions that if the option, the implementation of that option, the estimated cost exceeds our headroom, so is it acceptable that we have set the benchmark so the council will not breach its debt headroom and will not proceed to stage one if it does so. If the amount of money required on this option exceeds the council's ability to borrow more money than its potential limits, the headroom is good at the moment, should we progress with that or not? So it's time to stop here and ask these questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good point to pause here and just check. So the first two are staff recommendations, that we include those. The third and the fourth are questions that would be good to kick around here today and see if you can give us some indication about those. So I think it's good. This is the time to take any questions.
Thank you. I'll start with me, Tapsel.
Thank you. I think point 3 is that will be pretty exceptional circumstances, but we wouldn't want to not have that in there if we needed to. But the fits under debt headroom, my question is, does that take into consideration if we had a natural disaster, quite significant flooding or something, we had to maintain or renew critical infrastructure?
Yeah, so we'd apply the criteria of our borrowing limit that we set within the LTP, where we do have an internal one to provide a buffer. So if that is the limit that council wishes to place with regards to these first stage one, then that's what we would apply. Or alternatively, if you're seeing this as critical and there is a need to invest more, then you can raise it to that higher limit if you wish.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming today. Could I just ask a little bit, and sorry, this is probably a little bit nitpicky, but just the wording being used at the moment. Debt headroom. So I appreciate your comments, Ms. Colley, but in the last LTP at 2021, this project was valued at, I think, just under 61 mil, if I put the notes down right. In the last 2024 LTP, I think we had $104 million. So that's a big jump in 3 years already, admittedly over very post-COVID scenarios. I appreciate that. But I worry that the debt headroom we're taking into account is slightly different from the total affordability. Now, I know we look stronger at that in stage 2, but I do have a concern that even if the debt headroom said, yes, you can keep putting the price up, we can keep carrying it, at some point I just fear as councillors we need to be putting a line in the sand somewhere and saying, this is an amount, and I know we can't talk about Rotorua, but one of the things I've always insisted on is that we learn from mistakes. And I just feel at some point, and I'm not quite sure how we do it or how we articulate this, at some point there has to be a line in the sand regarding affordability and say, over this line we will not cross. I'm just putting it out there for my colleagues. As I say, I'm not prepared to articulate an example today, but I think we have to be very careful that we don't go down the normal route of we want this and it just ends up in a blank cheque in 10 years' time and everyone says, bugger, why didn't they take stronger measures at the start? So I just caution, and I hope that perhaps debt headroom isn't quite the right phrasing. Whether it needs to be broken down, I'm not sure, but I just put that out there now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. And you'll notice that we've changed the terminology. I think last time we talked about within the financial strategy, we've tried to make it a bit clearer. What you're talking about is, what sounds to me you're talking about is putting a fixed budget, which could be yet another way of doing that either at stage 1 or at stage 2. But absolutely, that's what we're looking forward for your discussion here.
Thank you, Mr. Z, and you've articulated far better than I could. But again, I don't want in the next LTP another $40 million jump, even if we can accommodate it in the headroom or not. We have to, as I say, we have to start finalising some costs somewhere along the line. Thank you.
Did you want to make any further comments around that? Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have to say I'm a wee bit uncomfortable, maybe a lot uncomfortable actually, about this whole multi-criteria analysis approach to decision making. I think this is the first time we've attempted to use such a system this term. Am I right there?
Probably in my time as CE, it appears so. But again, I'm happy to work with you on the other examples around the country and the world where this is used. It's a very standard industry standard practice.
Who's going to be the final decision maker when this working group comes back with whatever they come back with?
Council will be their final decision maker.
And so it would come back to council for decision with some kind of recommendation from this working group. Is that how it would work?
That's how I anticipate it, yes.
Yeah, I'm not comfortable with the whole decision-making approach. I'm concerned about this from an administrative law point of view, fettering discretion. But anyway, I'll leave it at that for the time being.
I think just to help councillors, the reason we're doing this so public, probably for the first time, is to actually get guidance from yourselves to us to enable us to go do this further work. So when we do come to you for that decision, that the options that we put in front of you are in line with your expectations. So this is the whole purpose of doing this is to promote much better decision making, and in particular by you setting the parameters and the guidelines that when that paper comes to you into the future, it is as per your expectations around the process.
Thank you, Thomas. Anything further?
Well, it's not obvious to me that there's a wide range of feasible options, actually. So it seems an overcomplicated approach to something. But anyway, I'll stand by.
Thank you. Councillor Kaifong?
Thanks, Chair. So that debt headroom, so when we do the local waters done well, that's not in the increased headroom? Or it is in the... How does that work with the...
No, this is based on us at the moment with regards to council undertaking this. Council hasn't made a decision on local waters done well and what the implications of that are, so we are only dealing with the now.
So even if it stays here under the new local waters done well, that it does increase later on the potential headroom, doesn't it, to 500?
You can do bespoke if you wish, but that's obviously a council decision. What we tried to do, obviously, by just putting the term debt headroom, is it did create a simple ceiling, if you were to say, with regards to for us to work against, acknowledging that there are lots of other different ways of increasing the capacity to invest, whether it's government funding, partners, or all the rest. But this is just to help us with regards to that first stage of trying to filter down as many options as possible back against a simple measure, which is not quite affordability, councillor, but the financial sustainability of this organisation. And so what are the options available to us that fit within the financial sustainability of the current framework of council?
If I can just add, it is current debt headroom, so we would not, the way we interpret this, it does not look at any additional headroom that might be generated by the financing tools available to a CCO. So we're looking at this council's financial debt headroom at the moment. Look, a proxy for that could, and we're looking forward to your feedback, could be you could put a number on it, as Councillor O'Brien has suggested, and say a total capital cost of this number. We didn't do that in this instance as a discussion point because we heard from the first workshop that we didn't want to exclude really good ideas simply because they didn't fit within the debt headroom or the financial strategy. So, but it's up to you as councillors whether you impose a fixed total budget for the project, if you wish.
So I was just following on from what Councillor O'Brien was saying. I would suggest that the economic viability or economic feasibility, both from a borrowing capacity and an operation, I don't know because I missed the previous workshop, but the operational costs. So yes, what does it cost to do the project?
That'll come in stage 2, Councillor.
But then I was just thinking, do you not look at that at that stage? Because otherwise you go down, you find a preferred option that fits all of that. And then, by the way, now it costs $5 million to operate. And that's like, well, it's too expensive, so should it not be something like economic feasibility or economic viability, which can then cover a drop down of debt headroom, operational costs, project costs, and all the other economic factors?
I guess, Your Deputy Worship, the intention, I guess, of stage 1 is to be more quantitative. It's either yes or no. So yes, you can do it. Yes, you've got the legal capacity to do it. Yes, you can afford it from a CapEx perspective. And then I think in the stage 2, it's a lot more qualitative. And one of those questions might be, yeah, we can do all those things, but if it costs $10 million a year to run and another option is only $500,000, then what's the weighting that we apply to that decision making? And that's more in that qualitative affordability phase. This really is, the whole purpose of it is to just capture as much as possible and just go yes, no. And then from that, what are those qualitative factors that you apply your judgment and weighting to?
Okay, well, if it was for me, then I'd say 4 needs a tick.
Thank you for your feedback. That's helpful. And I'll just move to Councillor Waru and then Mayor Tapsell. Over to you, Councillor Waru.
Yeah, thank you. Kia ora tātou. I suppose the question through you, Madam Chair, my concern is really where does the matter of engagement fit into this?
So that's on stage 2. Yep, and there will be a strong emphasis on that, which we'll hopefully take you through shortly.
Will it not be at the starting point? Where it says, I understand technical feasibility, I understand the legal and compliance part of it, but if anything, we should learn from, as Councillor O'Brien has said, to learn from sort of things that we maybe could have done a bit better, and maybe it needs to be done right at the start. In particular with the iwi, but not just iwi. I think these projects are things we need to take people on the journey, not rather hit them at certain points. So are you saying that we get through this first part in stage 2, that's when we start doing it?
Councillor, I'll try and answer this. Thomas might want to add more to that. I think there's a trade-off to be had. And when we look at some examples around criteria number 3, there are some trade-offs where if you included, as we've indicated in the speech bubble there, if you included that criteria, then every option at stage 2 will have already had a discussion with the landowner. Right. What that potentially might do is limit the number of options you have considerably, and it will raise the cost and time of stage 1, because there's quite a lot more work to do before we can have a meaningful discussion with any landowner, and they will take time to have that discussion with the landowner, and it will take time to develop those options, and we'll come to an example in a few slides' time. However, the benefit, and this is why I talk about trade-offs, the disadvantage is you might have very few options go through and it'll take you quite a bit of time and money to get to that point. The advantage is once you get past that point, every option has been discussed with the landowner. When you talk about engagement, one of the concerns I've got, is if we included the landowner condition at this stage, then potentially we're having 8 or 9 different conversations with landowners, and it's potentially that the community could get quite confused with those messages. So there's an advantage, but then there's a trade-off against disadvantage. So that's the kōrero we're having here.
Okay, well, I'll perhaps wait till the next few slides, but I'd say this though, Andrew, through you, Madam Chair, it's not always just about the landowners. I'll leave it at that, and then I'll wait for the next one. Kia ora.
Thank you for your feedback. Me Tapsell?
Thank you. Just to provide some clear feedback, I've had a bit of a think on point 3, and I do think it will be really extraordinary circumstances if we weren't to get landowner approval, because most of what we do is on public land. I don't know. So I would be happy to put a tick on there as well as a tick on option 4.
So both 3 and 4. Okay, thank you. Is there any other feedback, councillors?
Sorry, Madam Chair, I'll just, sorry to
yes.
I'll just take my leave now for a little while and I'll join back in.
Thank you. Cool. See you soon. Thank you, councillor. Trevor, Councillor Maxwell, did you have something you wanted to add here?
With interest, I am looking at what's a step once.
Oh, just turn your...
What if, Arohamai, what if 1, 2 and 3 all get a tick, number 4 doesn't? Will that be the biggest determiner of the final decision?
So at this stage, so when we come to the options, maybe can we skip forward a couple of slides? That might answer how that works. So what we're trying to show here is, councillor, is for any option, and we haven't talked about options yet, but for any option to pass through stage 1, it must get, if there are 4, then it must get all 4 ticks. If it gets 1 cross, it doesn't proceed. So we would not proceed any further unless it clears every criteria at stage 1. That's the purpose of that stage 1 criteria. And then when we get to stage 2, we'll do a bit more analysis, which we'll explain shortly. That's the proposed model. Yeah.
So it's a very yes-no situation. So this is where it would be helpful to have some sort of direction from each of you about what you're comfortable having in that first stage. If there's any further feedback at this stage, Councillor Wang?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just pretty simple, support 3 and 4, having ticks next to it as well. I think it makes sense to have these, and especially I think fitting under the debt headroom, taking into account what Councillor O'Brien said about learning from past mistakes, or learning from the past, but also I think it is a pretty understandable thing to have in there, just to ensure that we are operating within the boundaries, I guess. And again, I think it makes sense. So yeah, I'd definitely be supporting these 2.
Thank you, Councillor. Just a question around number 3, the landowner approval. And if we do have multiple options, say 4, 5 or 6, how do we manage those conversations and not confuse the public and the landowners? Have we thought that through? It's just, I can see that it will be quite challenging having those multiple conversations going on and Chinese whispers even happening around all of that, just from a practical point of view.
Yeah, look, I don't know if Thomas has anything, but I have a significant concern about that, specifically for that reason, and given how much interest there is in this topic. It's one of the biggest projects we've got, one of the biggest problems we've got to solve. I think it's practically quite difficult to have separate conversations that are all individually confidential while still having the disclosure requirements to council. So quite challenging.
I agree. Any time one of our projects involves land of some sort, it creates quite a difficult tension with regards to our delivery options going forward. Yeah.
So this is just my view at high level. This stage one, is really getting a handle on a high level, is it kind of doable? And the next stage is when we really go, okay, let's get full engagement, let's go into the detail as you've explained. And that's probably, I just think maybe the criteria in stage one, you just don't want to limit what we can do too much. That's my only reservation around adding all 4 criteria. But I do take on board the feedback that we've had from the councillors. Yes, Councillor O'Brien?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Like you, I have reservations about giving 3 a tick at this stage. Again, for pretty much the same reasons as what you've articulated. I suppose where I'm going, also I have a concern is, if we're saying that the lake was an option in some form, are we saying that we're going to say who's the actual, we know the owners of the lake bed have been identified, but the actual lake water itself, how are we going to get into whether we have a right with that or not? And can I also say, I'm concerned that if we tick number 3 at this stage, again, it limits our officers from looking at some options. And I just remind, and I'm sure I don't need to, but all my council colleagues around here, that our task is to come up with solutions in the best interests of the entire community across the board. Now, not so long ago, we were looking at one of the lakes contact beds options that Te Arawa had been very strongly involved in and designing. We didn't go ahead with that because the Dean option at the time wasn't pursued by that council. That's a lot of money that we put to that hasn't been used, unfortunately. So I just have a concern also echoing what you said about giving 3 a tick now, and as it's sort of framed here. So 1, 2 and 4, certainly for me. 3, I'm a bit uneasy with at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, that's helpful. Did you want... No, I was...
What we can do in the paper to you, we can give you either drop it down now if there's an indication from the council that you'd likely see that in stage 2, or we can give you an option in the decision-making paper with land in stage 1 or elsewhere if you wish. So I think hearing the concerns around the table, I'm sure there's a consensus here at the moment. So,
if I can just add, it goes... And look, there are some notional options later on which we've just put on there for, as Deborah says, for effect, but it would apply to any solution, right? So it would involve forest, if there were a forestry option being considered, and you tick that box, then before we evaluated any of the others, qualitatively, we would need to go and talk to all of the possible forest owners. If there were farms, then we'd have to go and talk to all of the farm owners in order to clear that hurdle. So that's you're quite right in the sense of the steps required to be able to get an option even to stage 2.
So my understanding is that you'll gather this feedback and try and present some options in a paper that sort of reflect some common themes, but also there is some discomfort around number 3 being in there as well. So I presume that's how you'll handle it.
Yeah, look, we'll outline in our last slide how we propose to structure the paper to give you, clear choices on each of these stages. But maybe it should be time. Maybe we move to stage 2.
Can I just flick to her Deputy Worship? She's got another.
Just one comment too. If we were to go out and get full landowner approval acceptance or no objection at this stage, given it's still at the investigative stage, you may affect commercial viability of a project because you've said, we're looking at your farm, your forest, your whatever. And so the price, so I think it kind of is identification of options, but not necessarily to the point where you actually need to physically be telling them or meeting with them to get their overall acceptance at that stage would be my view.
Thank you.
Well, that's certainly how we would interpret that.
The economic viability.
So maybe it needs to change with regards to, rather than saying landowner approval, is the land available?
Well, anything would be available for
We can cover that off towards the end.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Okay, so we'll move on to the next stage. Thanks, Thomas.
Stage 2 is, I guess, a little bit different. I will put them all up there. So these are the ones where we will be doing a bit of an exercise. So around on the back of the whiteboard, we do have something made out where we're going to ask each of you to put down a percentage. And so these are a little bit more values based rather than definitely yes or no. So, this is where I think Councillor Waru, this is where, depending on the weighting that you put in, what is the weighting with regards to mana whenua relationships. So this is probably a reflection of maybe what went wrong with Rotorua at the start, where we didn't engage adequately. We probably had a design, we had a plan, but what is the right time to have those discussions with the community? The second one is the wider community acceptance and support. So while smaller groups may be supportive of and highly supportive of different individual projects, it's actually putting it to the wider community and understanding the support for each of those options are. And everyone will have a different view with regards to the weightings for each of these in the decision-making process. And I'll show you a little bit of an example in the next couple of slides with regards to how that could apply. The third one is around the regulatory requirement or the water health. Discharging into fresh water has its challenges versus discharging onto land versus other options that are available. I think, Councillor, this is where the total life cycle cost of the project comes on board. And we have put wider economic value because recycled water, if we call it that, does have economic value as well. And maybe there is no opportunity now, but through this process there could be an opportunity identified where that water can add value to some other business or economic activity within Rotorua. And then lastly, the implementation risk. So every project will have a different risk profile and different ways of mitigating those risks. And so that have to be weighed up against it as well. So depending on the project, you would go through obviously those stage ones were yes, no's, and then stage 2 you would apply a value to the decision making with regards to how it achieves against that. So, Andrew, I'm not sure you want to add anything here?
Yeah, if I can add in, so implementation risk would include land acquisition risk, and total life cycle cost would include any land acquisition cost. And so, I expressed that there might be some challenges with having landowner approval at stage 1. There are these values at stage 2 that would reflect those risks if you hadn't had that discussion with the specific landowner at stage 1. So there is an ability in this framework for those concerns, both in terms of cost and acceptance, to be reflected in values 4 and 5 here as you evaluate each option.
Yeah. So what we might just do is we'll just skip ahead a little bit, and sorry, lots of transitions. It will just give you an example. Got a bit carried away with the transitions again, but that's all right. Skipped too far. And so here's 2 examples that are not related to wastewater. So we've taken 2 roading projects, and we'll assume that each one of these projects has gone through stage 1 and has achieved those outcomes. So the first one, which is the road reseal. So what we've got is a road that's either sealed already at the moment or maybe it's unsealed, and we're weighing up the options with regards to how to approach that reseal. And it might be we're cobbling it, we're concreting it, or we're asphalting it as an example. And each of those options will be weighed up against this criteria as well. So in this case, because the road's already there and it's resealing, we're not generally going to have a discussion with mana whenua. We're not generally going to have a wider discussion with our community either, but we may have actually had a specific discussion around maybe the people that occupy that road with regards to understanding their preference. We'll weigh up the environmental outcomes, and it might be that cobbles are recyclable and are more sustainable. I'm making this up, okay, so please don't send me an email to say that I've got this wrong. Versus, concrete is more sustainable versus asphalting. And so we've put a 10% weighting on the environmental outcomes, and it might be that maybe it's the waste that is left over and how recyclable it is. What we have said, though, is that because this is a simple project, actually 80% of its weighting needs to be on cost, because we are cost-driven, and then 10% is on the implementation risk with regards to how easy or hard it is between cobbling versus concreting versus asphalting. And that's how the 100% has come aboard. So that's a very simple project. To the right of that is a new highway, or let's say a new road. The road doesn't exist at the moment. So we've got to work through where that road would go through, what land that would go through. So we would be having a discussion with mana whenua. We'd be having a discussion also with the wider community on where the best route for that road is and what it's looking to achieve. There will be environmental outcomes as well. There could be some biodiversity there. So as an example, if we were to put a road through Sanatorium Reserve, there's native bats, there's geothermal features, there's a whole range of things as an example that we would consider. And, and in this case we've gone 15% for relationships with mana whenua, 15% for understanding the wider community support. Shouldn't be too many environmental outcomes there, but we'll put a 10% weighting there. And then the balance of it is around the total life cycle cost. So one route might be slightly cheaper to implement than the other because it's either shorter or you're not drilling through a hill or you're not having to build a bridge as an example. And then there's also the implementation risk. And you can see there that around the thinking that you'd have around approaching each one of those different projects. Now, we're not saying that doing a water discharge is a simple project. We're definitely not saying that. It's definitely similar to the decision-making and weightings of a new highway. We're not saying that those are the right ones, but just as an example, that it does highlight the thinking of how the stage 2 criteria would be applied, depending on the complexity of the project, the community involvement, the environmental outcomes, and the risks. And so with that, happy to take any questions on this, and in particular, keen to understand, we'll do an exercise shortly on weightings with regards to the discharge portion, but just keen to understand if there's any other criteria or values that you would like to consider going forward.
Thank you, Thomas. Any feedback? Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could you explain what relationship with mana whenua means? Because that terminology seems a bit ambiguous to me.
I'm sure if Paul was here, he would be able to articulate it a lot better than I would, but obviously mana whenua are an important part of our community, and we do need to have dialogue with them with regards to projects that we undertake and get feedback from them. And in some instances, particularly where they have a heavy interest in, such as water and wastewater, there is, I guess, a requirement for us to engage with them.
Is there anything?
As per the court action in the Environment Court back in 2012 on Rotorua to Rotorua.
Let's talk about the court action in 2025 that involved the Rotorua protesters. It seems that they had some unreasonable expectations. They seemed to think that they had a right of veto over projects, over that particular project, but they didn't. So how do we deal with that in this context?
So, Councillor, I won't comment on any other action that's been taken by the court. In terms of this project, this is why we're bringing it to you for some consensus, or some direction, some discussion today to help us with putting together a paper, and ultimately you will vote on these values, or would like you to vote on these values. So, happy to take any questions on other ones that you want to explore. not everyone's going to have the same view on all of them, but there'll need to be a consensus or some sort of coming together on these points to give us a framework to work on.
I don't think that answered my question, but okay.
No further questions? Any other questions or comments, councillors? The first thing is, do you think that this grouping of criteria is appropriate? Or do you think there should be any additions to this? So any of your feedback would be helpful at this stage. Thank you, Councillor O'Brien, and then Councillor Wang.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for you. I just wonder, from the CE and Mr Michael's point of view, having 1 and 2 separate, is there a danger if we get one roughly says okay and the other one says no, that we're sort of taking sides here? Again, your wording, so I'm just putting it out there now.
I think from my perspective, one of the reasons we are discussing these issues is actually to get some kind of consensus. I would think that when you're taking community, the wider community, doesn't matter whether you're Mana Whenua or all the community, have the same need to separate their wastewater from their daily life. So I would imagine that, the community all want to do that. They want to take it away from their properties for health purposes. Mana Whenua, at the same time, they will have, I don't think you'll find Mana Whenua objecting to or in opposition to the proper management of wastewater. What Mana Whenua's views might be related around as to how do you achieve that? What is the process of achieving that? So I'm not holding the magic stick here, Councillor O'Brien. All I'm saying that the community in totality, I think probably there's a general consensus about managing wastewater effectively, efficiently, in a healthy way. Mana Whenua, though, got different stewardship, katiaki roles, from a cultural perspective, and they still need, although they are members of part of the community, they also have some additional role on the wider environment. Now, I'm not staking a black or white answer to here, and there is a degree of separation.
Thank you for that answer. I suppose what I just have a concern with is if we go back to stage 1 and then, say that, option 3 should have a tick. If we got to a stage where, say, the lake, if we looked at the lake as an option, if Mana Whenua said no to the lake, but the wider community said, well, the lake water is so much better than under this treatment now, especially if, say, the discharge point was, say, Sulphur Point, I just wonder if we're sort of making a rod for our own backs. I'm only putting it out there. I don't think it needs a yes or a no, but for my council colleagues, I'm just putting it out there to say this could be a fraught area.
Well, Councillor, what I'd say is these are complex. It's a very complex situation. The multi-criteria analysis is meant to try and create some objective framework for a discussion and an evaluation, as Thomas said, to when we bring the final decision back to you. I think it's appropriate that these criteria are at 2 rather than at 1 because of specifically what you've illustrated. The challenge was around the landowner, and that's come up, and there's been a bit of discussion about that today again, whereas if you have less criteria at the top, the council of the day can make a more nuanced decision around how they weigh up these factors. Whereas if you have them up front, then it straight out gets excluded without having a qualitative analysis. So that's the trade-off.
Does that help? I'd just like to acknowledge that Councillor Wallo has returned, and Councillor, can you hear us okay? Kia ora. We're just on to stage 2 values now. We've just had them presented to us, and we're asking for feedback about what the councillors think about the appropriateness of each of those, whether they should be there or not, and if you have any feedback or additions. So now I'm just going to move to Councillor Wang for some feedback.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wonder if for this stage now then, do we have that discussion around the economic impact and whether that potentially could fit under 2, or is that? do we introduce a new one?
Sorry. So this is an abbreviated description to fit into the table. So that would fit into 4. So total life cycle cost and wider economic value. So we've fine-tuned it a little bit since last time, and we've introduced criteria 5, which is implementation risk, because we realised that wasn't captured previously under any of the values, and particularly if we took landowner approval out of stage 1 for the reasons we've discussed, then that would be reflected in item 5 here. So that, to your question, it's in 4.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Maxwell.
Through to the CEO, just a thought from me. Don't you think that perhaps in stage 1, that relationship with mana whenua should be talked about there to save a lot of time later and a lot of court cases that go either way?
Councillor, I'm as keen as anyone to avoid court cases. As we mentioned earlier, there is a way, if you wish, if council decides, for us to introduce a pass-fail criteria in stage 1. We can craft that somehow. The advice I'd give is that the more questions and criteria we introduce at stage 1, the less options you will get to evaluate at stage 2. And keeping in mind this will be the next council. So we can be quite restrictive at stage 1, and then you'll get 1 or 2 options in stage 2. If I reflect on the time I've been before this council doesn't like being given 1 or 2 options. So my advice is, if you would like to keep it further open, then you'll have less criteria at stage 1. If you would like to introduce a criteria at stage 1, then that will be a pass-fail option. As you rightly mentioned, what that means is any option that does go through has been through all of those checks and is more robust. Trade-off, you're likely to get much fewer options. So that's what we're looking for this council for some guidance on.
Save ourselves a lot of angst in stage 2.
Saving the angst is what that... Yeah, thank you. Is there any further feedback on these values? Do you think they're appropriate? Or would you add anything in there? Seems like there's not much further feedback on that.
I continue not to be comfortable with much of it. Sorry.
Thank you.
Are you going to use that descriptions, or is there a better descriptor, like we currently have under the Local Government Act, maybe not for much longer, but, the full wellbeing, so should this be sort of grouped more around economic, so it makes more sense? Social, so then you're putting 1 and 2 together under the social, so community buy-in, community support, technical, so feasibility, implementation risk, environmental, so then you look at water health as well as public health.
Yeah, it's a good suggestion, Councillor. We didn't start with the well-beings for this, but as you can see, a lot of it is reflected in there, and so we do need to do some work to further define those things, as has been asked. So we're starting to work on that, but we didn't want to hold this workshop up before we had that discussion with you.
Okay. Just a thought as to more generic groupings that people may have better understanding of. Make it simpler if one is the social wellbeing, social outcomes, so then it's the buy-in from the community, regardless of which part of the community. Consultation, that engagement. Anyway, just a...
Thank you. That's good feedback. Thank you. And further definitions of each would be helpful.
Under that environmental, you've got not just the quality of the water, but you've got, what does it cost if you're trucking it, miles to the sea in terms of carbon credits, all that sort of stuff. So you're looking at it from a different perspectives of what each meaning could be within that definition.
True. Fair enough. Taken on board. Thank you. Matt Tapsell?
Thank you. I certainly don't mind more explanation provided, like as a footnote or something, but we have had a really strong signal from the government that they are removing the 4 wellbeings from the Local Government Act, and personally I think we've always had the challenge across all councils in New Zealand with the wellbeings, because we're not necessarily mandated or funded to support the social side of wellbeing. That's more government agencies. So I wouldn't overcomplicate it, and I think that the wording is okay as it is.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Lee.
One question on the wording and the terminology is water health. I presume that's talking about the scientific analysis of the water. I'm wondering whether Te Māori o Te Wai is referring to, in addition to that, perhaps some spiritual elements or something?
Can someone clarify that?
Well, I can ask Councillor Brown to clarify that. Those are his words, so happy to get some feedback from Councillor Brown if he's still around.
I think he might have actually left to go to his other meeting, actually, sorry.
I remember that was covered. Councillor Lee asked the exact same question before, and that was answered really well at the time. It was translated to the life of the water.
Thank you. Anything further?
Well, what does life of the water mean? It still doesn't answer my question, and certainly not for the benefit of the public who were not participating in the previous confidential workshop.
It's probably not just a measurement of scientific values, it's probably the wildlife and the biodiversity and all that kind of thing that are in the water as well, I would imagine. So those are other measurements of the health of the water, not just the scientific values of what the water contains. So yes, and Stavros may have something to add to that. Thank you.
I'll try not to engage into subjective conversations, but I think one of the aims of setting national performance standards for treatment of effluent is actually to identify the quality of the water that leaves a recovered, a treatment plant to be discharged. And those national standards take into consideration the simple fact that recovered water going into the ecosystem, whether it's land or water or whatever, they should not have the ability to impose a toxic impact onto the environment. So it needs to be able to continue to sustain the life properties of the receiving environment, whether it's a stream or lake or whatever it is. And that's what the national standards are developed. Now there are other intrinsic values within the Te Māori or Te Wai, which is unique to how you perceive water. But I think those two are not inconsistent with each other. It's actually not compromising the life sustainability, sustenance of water bodies. That's how we see it. And we have to comply with it. There are standards, we have to comply with it.
Yeah. Thank you, Stavros. I see Councillor Wadu has his hand up.
Yeah, kia ora, te taumana, thank you. Through you, just quickly, thank you for acknowledging I came back onto the court, and I've just had a little bit of time to go through the slide there. I think for me it's, whether it's stage 1 and stage 2, but I think there's a big piece, engagement piece that needs to sort of go along the whole lot. In fact, I'd like to urge our staff to sort of not to forget, the Te Tatau o Te Rawa and how they can actually help to engage effectively here, in particular with iwi, because that's where my main concern is, and still, was and still is. So I think that's where I would like to sort of make an emphasis on the engagement. I mean, it's their relationship with mana whenua, but having a relationship and something more meaningful, which I'd like to think here in Rotorua, we're a bit more, we're a bit more than that in terms of how we engage with iwi in particular, but not only iwi. You're going to be looking at talking to people like from the Lakes Trusts, from the CNI, from potential. And so these things, regardless if they're directly in it or not, given the legislation in terms of the LGA and all this kind of stuff, There are some big things there that I think we shouldn't take lightly, given the things that have happened recently. We learn from that and we have something solid in place to really make sure we're doing the right thing here, because I think it's taking people on the journey is the way. Not telling them right at the community as a whole, actually. Not saying things right at the last minute, but making sure we're doing things right there. And I think that piece goes across both stages, from my point of view. However, I said I would say my piece about that in this time, so kia ora tata.
Kia ora, thank you. And taking people on the journey is going to be part of this whole process, definitely. And thank you for acknowledging Te Tata o Te Arawa. I'd just like to acknowledge our colleagues who are in the chamber today with us listening in on this workshop. And is there any comments that you'd like to make, Andrew?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Councillor Waru, I understand your earlier question a bit better now, which I didn't really answer at the time. So what we're talking about in this workshop is only the framework. There's a whole project delivery methodology which will include the engagement plan, how we engage with iwi chairs, with Te Tato, with the youth council, with all parts of the different parts of the community. That we're not discussing that at the moment today. Absolutely, that will be part of the overall project plan and how this conversation is rolled out throughout the community. That's not contained within the framework, but that is absolutely part of the overall project plan, and that will come to you in due course. So I just want to reassure you that they're not substitutes for each other. That's an and. This is purely the framework in which we will have those discussions with the working group, which will include representatives from iwi, Te Tata o Te Arawa, other parties as approved by council. So we'll bring you back that working group terms of reference. We'll bring you back the engagement plan. This is simply the decision-making framework. And the reason we're bringing this to you first is in terms of setting up the working group, we want to give them some guidance as to how council is going to take on their input and how their input will get fed back through to council. So that's the reason we're bringing this to you now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Angel. If I can just make a comment through you, Madam Chair?
Sure, yes.
No, I acknowledge that and thank you for your assurances, Angel. My fear is that, if it's not sort of carved into the framework, it could be looked at as something that we'll get to or maybe becomes secondary, and I'm not saying that's your intent, but I'm just looking for something a bit more, I suppose, solid. That makes sure that, and it shows too that we're serious about doing these things right. That's all. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you for your feedback. And just before I move to Councillor Brown, Andrew, you just mentioned feedback to Council. I'm assuming that the working group will be reporting back at regular times to full Council along the way, along this journey as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Brown, you had some comments or a question? I think you're on mute at the moment, Greg.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just on the conversation with Councillor Waru, can you hear me okay?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear, thank you.
Okay, good. Why would we not ask for Te Tato feedback on this framework? It's on their agenda. I'm hearing Councillor Waru loud and clear, and I have the same concerns.
Thank you for that feedback. Thank you. I think you might need to mute yourself again, Councillor Brown.
Councillor Brown, it is on the Te Tato 2050 Vision Committee agenda. Absolutely, they will be part of it, as I think we've mentioned a few times. I'm sorry I've missed that. But yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Wang.
Thank you. And just following on from that, because I kind of see the implementation risk as almost like a bit of an umbrella that definitely covers the relationship with mana whenua, and that piggybacks off what Councillor Brown and Councillor Waru, their concerns around that. And I understand we definitely need that one there, but there is kind of that link between a few of them.
That's a good observation, and that is quite correct, isn't it? Yes, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Correct me if I'm wrong, hasn't the central government planning or signalled that they plan to reduce the requirements for iwi consultation under their amendments to the Resource Management Act?
Yeah, the national standards of discharge standards will undergo consultation, yes.
So how would that affect this conversation?
Well, I think we've said at the beginning is that at the very minimum or technical requirements, stage one, it would be to meet those regulations. If we don't meet these regulations, we don't have a conversation for any other option. So those standards, as they evolve, it's our baseline. An option meets that standards or doesn't meet those standards.
Yeah, that would create a floor for us to not go below. This sets the framework for how you want us as an organisation to engage with the community on getting this project across the line. Just because the new regs may have minimum requirements doesn't mean we have to do the bare minimum.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. It appears to be all the commentary from the councillors at this stage. Did you want to proceed to the next part? Thank you.
Can we, for our benefit, please, can we confirm those 5 stage 2 values are to be incorporated?
Yeah.
But then we can talk about the weighting of them.
So if you have any discomfort around this or otherwise...
I have discomfort with all of it, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I heard your feedback. Awesome, thank you. Is there anything else that would you like to add to this? The only thing I can think of is if we don't include option 3 in stage 1, then it may need to come into here, unless it just is under one of the umbrellas. But as a number 5 or not.
Yep, that could be an option that we bring to you. Yep.
But is there anything else that you'd like to add, councillors, at this stage? Councillor Waru? Yes.
Oh, kia ora. Sorry, just a little comment. I just heard something about the Arrowman, and I'm not too sure. I can't really see properly, but I'm all for that. That's to me to do more the legal and the compliance stuff. That's fine. I think that's we got to comply, but I think as an extra layer, what I was talking about earlier still holds water. As far as we're not to use it because we're talking about the water, but that's what I think would assure the community in Tauranga that things are being done right because it's the right thing to do.
Yes, understood. Thank you. Kia ora. So we've got 5 values there: the relationship with mana whenua, the community acceptance and support, water health to Māori o Te Wai, and environmental outcomes. We have total life cycle cost and implementation risk. And there don't appear to be... Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Could I just ask, how would we evaluate number 2? Are we just going to go out for consultation? Are we sending out a survey? How are we going to quantify that?
Well, I will anticipate that, if we want to have a community acceptance, the council has a number of instruments to do that. You can consult the design your plan, it's a long-term plan. You have a specific, a special consultative process about an outcome. So I think, elected members, you are on the driving seat to decide how to acknowledge community acceptance for, let's say, a preferred option. So various instruments we can engage for that.
So that for me actually opens up more of a concern, probably not for today because this isn't about detail,
no.
But are we doing, is 50% going to be the pass rate? Is it going to be 51? If one's 56% and another's 54, does the winner win? I mean, again, it's not for today, but...
I think the good thing with the weightings is there is no pass or fail. So it'll just, you'll set a criteria for that and it'll flow through to a score. So it won't need a definite yes or no on that answer.
Yeah, I don't know that some of our friends in Tarawera would quite see that quite as how you've just put it, but I think for me it just goes back to when we break up 1 and 2 and asking for a different weighting, I think we're at risk here of dividing our community where that probably doesn't need to happen, but I'm happy for my council colleagues to make their own. Thank you.
That's a good observation, but thank you for that. And Councillor Maxwell?
Now I ask, Stavros, you mentioned before there are a couple of things in there that have got national approval already or national significance. One would be Te Mauri o Te Wai and relationship with mana whenua. Aren't those in law?
Well, as I said, there are technical evaluations for meeting certain quality criteria. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
We supply our community with drinking water. Those drinking water standards established at the national level, and this national level defines the drinking water standards, and we have to meet them. What the discharge standards, national standards will define what is the minimum acceptable or maximum acceptable values of impurities in recovered water. As a very minimum, we have to meet those standards. So those things are minimum expectations we have to meet, and they're going through, stage 1, of the evaluations. But we are asking here to create a framework to say, once you've gone through these expectations, what are the next values you want us to consider in constructing a recommendation eventually as to what is the preferred option and why we're making that recommendation. So it's quite important for you to be comfortable that in the knowledge that we're meeting these national standards, we are achieving the expectations, what next? So that's your guidance, that's what we need, your feedback into, and the community's feedback eventually.
And I guess that's what this stage here is do you have want to add anything extra to this set of values, or are we comfortable with the way they are? And it looks like there's a reasonable degree of comfort. And perhaps we can move on to the next part, which would be the weighting.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you want to go through this exercise, or shall we just go to the board? We'll kick forward. Sorry, lots of transitions. So what we might do is, once I've gone through this, we'll just take a break for you to have a think about this, and then what we'll do is we'll get you to go up to the whiteboard and just write where your weightings are, because ultimately what we're working towards are these things here. And so what we are looking to do is bringing a decision-making paper to council. What will be included in that is on the stage 1, what is the agreed criteria that you'll give us guidance on, or what you want to include. And then also on stage 2, and then with regards to stage 2, staff will give a recommendation on weightings, which will be based off the information that we'll gather from you on this whiteboarding exercise. So just as a reminder, we'll do something similar to here. So relationship with mana whenua, you may decide, actually I'll just use this next one here. Here's 2 examples. One has said it's 10%, and the community is also 10%, so it's weighing each of those voices identical. Environmental impact is 15%, whereas the next person has said 20%. And in this case, person 1 has gone, actually the total cost and an economic benefit is, I want to have a stronger weighting, so 30%, because cost is important to me. Whereas the next person has gone 20%, because actually I see in my values and my decision making, I want a stronger weighting with regards to the relationships and the community acceptance. And then at the bottom, 1 has said, actually, I see this as the risk of delivery is high, so I want to put a high weighting on that versus the other one lower. And so just remembering, whatever weightings that we land upon, all those projects that make it through stage 1, will then be weighed against this criteria. Each of those projects will be scored against that, and then each of those projects will be scored, I guess, ranked highest to lowest with regards to the score. And that doesn't mean the one with the highest score automatically wins. There's obviously decision-making processes, engagement, and a whole raft of further activity that we do. But what it does do is it leads us to preferably a top, or if not, a small handful of options for us to pursue. Madam Chair, if there are any other questions, otherwise we might take a break for you to consider how you would put your weightings, and then we'll ask you to come back after that break and put them up onto the whiteboard. We will then take that away and tabulate it, and we'll probably just end the workshop there, unless the Chief Executive or yourself wanted to add anything else to it.
Thank you, Thomas. So, councillors, just questions for Thomas on that part?
Yes.
Councillor Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can we just go back a page there, please? The one that you skipped rapidly through.
That was one with many, many different examples. And so I'll go back one, I'll have all there we go.
I was fascinated with some of these examples. I mean, truck to the sea and geothermal injection and evaporation and sending to space.
Look, this is the purpose was to just go give some examples. Many of these are not realistic, but just to highlight how an individual project would fall against both stage 1 and stage 2 criteria. Please don't take it to mean that we're planning on sending our wastewater to the moon.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? No, it appears that we have some clarity around that.
Yes.
No questions online. So what we'll do is, as Tom suggested, is we'll take a break, have a wee think about the weightings for those values, and then we'll come back in 15 minutes, about 25 to, and be ready to sort of add those to the mix, your preferences, please. Thank you. Thank you, team, for your work.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Back, everybody. We've just had a break for 15 minutes and had a look at the weightings, and each councillor has had a think about what they would prefer. The feedback that's been given today will be tabulated by the staff and the feedback taken away and put into some options for us in a formal paper to council. Is there anything else that you'd like to say? Over to council. You got a comments?
Yeah, just got a question or two. The previous slide that we popped back to referred to options such as sending it off to space or trucking it to the ocean and so forth. What we didn't see was the contact bed. I was wondering what the state of that option is. What we also didn't see was an option to pipe it to the Paringa stream and put it in.
Thank you, councillor. Actually, those options that were put up there today were purely for
academic purposes.
Yes,
so I was just wondering if those
realistic
options are being considered or going to be considered.
None of the options have actually been put forward yet. So this is just a process to get a framework in place. So this is not a place to discuss the options just yet. Cool. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Maxwell.
I'd just like to ask this. Thanks very much for the presentation. Can I ask, when this is years ago, Lumber Cube came here, did we not have this kind of exercise to get the weighting? Because I thought it sort of ticked all the boxes, and next thing the community just turned against it and all that kind of thing. But yeah, did we not have this?
No, that was a private activity that had a resource consent, and obviously the challenges that operation ran into was the noise and their resource consent, and so yes, that wasn't us, so therefore this doesn't apply for us. Yeah.
Thank you, councillors. I think if there's no further comments from the CE or from our staff on today's exercise, thank you all for your time and for your feedback. Hopefully it's been helpful for the staff to move forward in the process. And if you're comfortable, Councillor Maxwell, would you be able to close us off with a karakia, please? Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you. I would appreciate it. Thank you very much.
E te atua whakatūwhera tia mai ki a mātou ngā kuaha o te tika o te pono o te māramatanga I tēnei wā I ngā wā katoa ko I hukraiti hoki tō mātou kai whakaora. Āmene.
Āmene.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Maxwell. Thank you, staff. That's the work.